It was a cold December morning, and the sun had barely risen when Sarah stood at the bus station. Her heart felt uneasy, though she couldn't explain why. The air smelled of dust and fuel as people shouted about ticket prices. Her bag, packed tightly with her belongings, hung heavy on her shoulder. She was finally going home to spend Christmas with her family after months at school in Minna. As she glanced around, Sarah noticed a man in a tattered brown coat staring at her from across the station. His face was weathered, his eyes piercing. He slowly shook his head at her, almost like a warning. Goosebumps prickled her skin, but she brushed it off. "I'm overthinking again," she muttered to herself, trying to focus on choosing the right bus. Sarah was a bright and hard-working student in her final year of university. Her parents had worked tirelessly to send her to school, and she dreamed of making them proud. But deep in her heart, she carried a fear that she rarely shared. Her village had a reputation, a place where strange things happened. She remembered the stories of travelers falling ill after ignoring warnings or of accidents happening on the way back home. That morning, her roommate, Kimi, had urged her to pray before leaving. "Sarah, December is not just any month. You know people are watching. You have to be careful." But Sarah had laughed it off. Now, as she stood at the bus station, Kimi's words echoed in her mind. After much deliberation, Sarah picked a bus that seemed decent enough. She settled into a window seat, watching vendors rush by, selling everything from roasted corn to bottles of water. The driver, a stocky man with a loud voice, seemed confident. Yet, something about the bus felt off. As Sarah pulled out her phone to text her mother, the man in the tattered coat appeared again. He walked up to her window, leaning in. "Don't take this bus," he said in a low, urgent voice. "Find another one." Startled, Sarah's first instinct was to ignore him, but his words sent a chill through her spine. She hesitated, her hand frozen mid-text. "Why?" she asked. He simply shook his head and walked away. The bus filled up quickly, and the driver revved the engine. Sarah couldn't shake the uneasy feeling in her chest. She glanced out the window one last time, hoping to see the man again, but he was gone. The bus lurched forward, and Sarah made a sudden decision. "Wait! Stop the bus!" she shouted. The other passengers stared at her as she grabbed her bag and hurried off. She felt a mix of relief and embarrassment, wondering if she had just made a foolish decision. Another bus was loading passengers nearby, and she decided to board it instead. As Sarah's new bus hit the road, she leaned back in her seat, trying to relax. The hum of the engine and the chatter of passengers lulled her into a sense of calm. But halfway through the journey, a loud bang startled everyone. A tire had burst. The bus pulled to the side of the road, and the driver began inspecting the damage. While waiting, Sarah overheard two women talking about an accident up ahead. "I heard it was bad," one of them said. "A bus collided with a truck. Many didn't survive." Sarah's heart sank as she realized they were talking about the bus she had left earlier. Her hands trembled as she pulled out her phone to check the news. The pictures showed the same bus she had almost boarded, now a mangled wreck on the highway. Tears streamed down her face as she thought about the man in the brown coat. Who was he? How did he know? The bus finally resumed its journey, but Sarah couldn't stop thinking about how close she had come to disaster. Her heart was heavy, but a small voice inside her whispered, "Pray." Back at the village, Sarah's parents were overjoyed to see her. They embraced her tightly, thanking God for her safe arrival. But the moment she stepped into their home, she felt a strange energy in the air. Her grandmother, an elderly woman with sharp eyes, studied her closely. "You came back differently," Grandma said, her voice low. Sarah frowned, unsure of what she meant. But before she could ask, her mother interrupted. "Let her rest first." That night, Sarah had a vivid dream. She was walking through a dense forest, the air thick with the sound of whispers. Shadows moved around her, and she could hear her name being called. Suddenly, the man in the brown coat appeared again. "You're not safe yet," he said. Sarah woke up in a cold sweat, her heart racing. She knew she had to pray, but she didn't know where to start. The stories of her village's mysteries and the warnings she had ignored now felt all too real. The days that followed were filled with strange occurrences. Sarah noticed that certain relatives avoided looking her in the eye. Her grandmother seemed more protective than usual, often lighting candles and muttering prayers under her breath. One evening, while fetching water from the well, Sarah heard footsteps behind her. She turned quickly, but no one was there. Her heart pounded as she hurried back to the house, spilling half the water in her bucket. When she reached home, she set the bucket down and leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. Her grandmother noticed her distress. "What is it, Sarah?" she asked, her tone calm but concerned. "I heard someone behind me," Sarah whispered, her voice shaky. "But when I turned around, no one was there." Her grandmother's face darkened. "Sarah, this is not a time to be careless. The battles we face in this life are not always visible. We must stay vigilant." The next morning, Sarah woke up feeling uneasy. She decided to talk to her mother about the strange occurrences. They sat together in the kitchen, the aroma of frying plantains filling the air. "Do you think someone is after me?" Sarah asked hesitantly. Her mother frowned. "It's possible, but remember, God's protection is stronger than any harm that can come your way. We should speak to Pastor Joshua. He's helped many people in this village through difficult times." Later that day, Sarah and her mother visited the church near the market square. It was a simple building with wooden benches and a modest altar. Pastor Joshua greeted them warmly. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm and reassuring, "I've been expecting you." Sarah's eyes widened. "How did you know I'd come?" Pastor Joshua smiled. "Sometimes, God reveals things to his servants. I've seen you in my prayers, and I know you're going through a challenging time." They spent the afternoon talking and praying. Pastor Joshua explained that Sarah's troubles were spiritual attacks meant to derail her destiny. He gave her scriptures to read and prayed over her, anointing her with oil. That night, Sarah slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. Her dreams were no longer filled with fear but with hope. She saw herself walking through a bright field, her path lit by a warm, golden light. The next morning, her grandmother noticed the change in her demeanor. "You look different, my child," she said, smiling. "I feel different, Grandma," Sarah replied. "It's as if a heavy burden has been lifted." In the days leading up to Christmas, the village was abuzz with activity. Women prepared festive meals, children played with handmade toys, and the air was filled with the sound of laughter and music. Sarah joined her family in decorating their home, hanging colorful fabrics and fresh flowers. One afternoon, while helping her siblings gather firewood, Sarah noticed something unusual. A man in a brown coat stood at the edge of the forest, watching her. But this time, instead of fear, she felt a strange sense of calm. "Who are you?" she called out. The man stepped forward, his face now familiar. "Sarah, you've been asking questions," he said gently. "I am Pastor Joshua. I've been sent to guide you." Pastor Joshua explained that he had appeared in her dreams to warn her of the dangers she faced. "You're destined for great things, Sarah," he said. "But you must remain steadfast in prayer and faith." Sarah nodded, his words sinking deep into her heart. On Christmas morning, the entire family attended the church service. The little church was filled with joyful songs and heartfelt prayers. Sarah felt a warmth in her soul as she knelt at the altar, tears streaming down her face. After the service, the family gathered for a festive meal. The table was filled with jollof rice, roasted chicken, and an assortment of traditional dishes. Laughter and stories flowed as they celebrated the day together. As the festive season came to an end, Sarah prepared to return to school. Her grandmother handed her a small Bible and said, "Keep this with you always. It will guide and protect you." Sarah hugged her tightly. "Thank you, Grandma. I'll never forget everything you've taught me." On the bus ride back to school, Sarah looked out the window at the passing countryside. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. The challenges she had faced had made her stronger, and she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The end.